Hello, everyone. We are here today to talk about Anna Delvey, or Anna Sorokin, which is her real name. I have Elizabeth Grace in the studio with me today, and Elizabeth is an astrologer in New York City. And who better to discuss this chart than Elizabeth, because that's the city in which Anna did this big scheme and con, and we're going to discuss all this and share her chart. So hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, Kathy.
So
it's nice to see you. Here we are.
So I wanted to call this Interpreting Anna because it's a little bit of a play on words for the Netflix show that was released about a month ago, I think, maybe a little longer, in February. Mm-hmm. And it was called Inventing Anna. And that's when I first really understood what Anna Delvey did. I had heard about her before. I'm sure you heard about her as it was happening since you were in the same city.
Yes, here in New York. Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about her chart in depth, and this is going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. What's fun about this horoscope is, one thing that's fun is that when somebody makes news, nobody makes news, nobody makes headlines unless there's something going on in their horoscope. And if you watch newsmakers over an extended period of time, as you and I both have, you come to have a list of expectations of what you're going to see when you look at the horoscope, even without a birth time. And so what's been fun about this particular exercise in looking at Anna's horoscope, what we know of it, is that we see patterns in it that we expected would be there and were activated when there were events happening in Anna's life, when she was making news. We see the things in the horoscope, and that's part of what we're going to share with you guys today. How it's just astrology is just amazing.
Indeed. So let's dive in and let us show you first, or talk a little bit about some basics. Who is Anna Delvey? All right. So they call her a fake German heiress. Her real name is Sorokin. She changed it to Delvey. I like Delvey better. I don't know why. She seems like Anna Delvey fits her better than Sorokin, personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why she did it.
That's why she did it. She resonated with it. And a lot of people said that they inferred from her that she was an heiress and was going to receive this large trust fund. She proclaims that she never really said that, but she says people just assumed it. She moved to New York City in 2014, and we're going to talk about what was going on in her chart in 2014. She easily worked her way into the New York City social circles. She was a player. She very smoothly glided into that, right?
Well, she came in, she had taken initially an internship, which I think then became a job, with a magazine called Purple, which I believe was a fashion magazine, if memory serves. And so what brought her to New York for the first time was Fashion Week, this event that happens once or twice a year here in New York. And so I guess she liked it enough that she decided that she wanted to move here, and she was able to transfer because the magazine that she was working for, I think at that time she was either based in Paris or London. I'm not quite sure.
I think it was Paris.
I think it was Paris. And so she was able to transfer to the New York office of this magazine called Purple. But she didn't stay there for long.
Yes, because she's a very independent spirit, a maverick, right. And she needed to do her own thing.
She needed to do her own thing, correct.
Mm-hmm. So she's called a social grifter because she really did a con. She scammed. So let's talk about this. She defrauded banks, hotels, and friends for more than $200,000. Okay. So it caught up with her in 2017, and she was arrested she had tried to escape to LA, but it caught up, and she was arrested October 3rd, 2017, remanded without bail to Rikers Island, which from what I understand is no fun place to be. and then convicted on 4 counts of theft services, 3 counts of grand larceny, 1 count of attempted grand larceny. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Sentenced to 4 years in prison in May of 2019.
4 to 12 was the original sentence. So 12 would have been the maximum. 4 years was the minimum. But of course, she had already been in jail for 19 months. So I believe that might have been credited to her sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And then she, because of quote unquote good behavior, because of her good behavior, she was released earlier than what would have been the minimum sentence of 4 years. And so she was released from prison on, as you can see from our screen, on February 11th, 2021.
But what's interesting is I was just reading earlier this morning that while she was in prison, she also got in trouble several times, and she was in solitary a few times, and there were fights. She continued power plays in prison. She learned how to navigate the system very quickly. She bought and sold certain things. She established her dominance even at Rikers Island. She knows how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right after she was released, ICE detained her because she had overstayed her visa. And I think October 2022 there's going to be a trial for her possible deportation to Germany.
Well, she was ordered deported, but then she didn't show up. And then her immigration lawyer was able to, get an emergency stay. So she's still being held. She's still in custody, but she was not put on a plane, although that was supposed to happen.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? If we ever figure out her birth time, I just know in astrocartography, she's got to have angular planets in New York City. And so we'll talk about that later when we're talking about possible rectified times that we are halfway considering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's look at her chart. So this is her horoscope. We do not have a birth time. So if you are an astrological student, you have to look at this chart without looking at in which planets the houses are. You ignore the houses, you ignore the angles. This is a chart with no birth time. Drill it into your head, because if you know a little bit about astrology, you're going to tend to go, ooh, look at all that 12th house stuff. And since we don't know her birth time, we don't know.
Yeah, we can't assume that that's correct. And Kathy, what you've done is, astrologers have 2 options for calculating a chart with no known birth time. And you are using a chart calculated for sunrise that places the sun on the ascendant. And some astrologers will use a noon birth time. So it's just whatever works best for the comfort and the familiarity of the astrologer. So we're looking at a sunrise chart, right?
Yes, this is where the planets were at sunrise on the day of her birth, January 23rd, 1991. And interestingly enough, the big challenge is the moon changed signs that day.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you get these cases where there's no birth time, and then you have to start thinking about, okay, well, in which sign was the moon for this person? So there's an option of, if she was born before noon, then she had moon in Aries, afternoon, moon in Taurus. So we're going to talk about this in the next slides, about which moon sign we think and why. Okay, so she's sun in Aquarius. And we're gonna go through this step by step by step. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and talk about moon in Taurus or moon in Aries. Now, you believe moon in Aries, right?
I think she has moon in Aries. I do. And why the moon is why we immediately zero in on trying to make a judgment about whether the moon is in Aries or Taurus is because the moon drives the persona. It's our mentor, our teacher, our friend, Noel Till called it the reigning need of the horoscope. And that the moon, depending upon what sign it's in and how it is connected to other planets in the horoscope, will give us a clue as to what somebody needs to fulfill in order to be happy.
Yes. And I have one other slight little take on the moon that I want to add, which is I believe that the moon sign also can suggest skills that have been highly developed from other lifetimes. And I believe when we incarnate, we bring those skills with us. I always say in our little toolbox that we bring in, and we can reach in there, and it's a comfort and it's a natural place we go. The moon sign is very comfortable. And when people get stressed, they usually react with their moon sign because it is so comfortable, because you may have had lifetimes developing those skills. So moon in Aries, which is my moon sign also, would be the warrior, would be having a lot of comfort in getting your own needs met. I always say for moon in Aries, you're really good at being first in line. If there's a buffet, moon in Aries is the first one. It's a natural skill. The moon in Aries temperament says, well, if I have a need, it's up to me to get it met. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to show you some justification for why we think moon in Aries. Moon in Taurus would be a totally different energy.
Yes.
Moon in Taurus would be more stable, slower. See, moon in Aries gives you a more assertive personality.
Somebody who needs to get things started.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who leads. Somebody, my example in this day and age for a famous person with moon in Aries is our Vice President, Kamala Harris, because if you look at her resume, she's always the first to do anything. And she's proud of that. And if she were your client and came to you and said she was thinking of doing something that no one had ever done before, you would encourage her to do that because you know that this is something that she needs to do in order to feel fulfilled. And we see in Anna Delvey's actions, she needed to get things started. It didn't matter if no one had ever done what she wanted to do. That didn't seem to enter her, her considerations. It's like, so what if nobody's done it? I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm. She pioneered.
Pioneer.
So let me just adjust the camera here. Okay. Here's a quote from her father who said, she has a very selfish personality. We can't do anything about it. We raised her well. Now, here's where we have to remind people, and we're going to do this many times during this presentation, that there is a spectrum of expression possible with all the planets in everybody's horoscope. One person might live their chart on the highest possible level. Another person might live it on a stressed or a shadow level, and there is some free will on that. It's not fated that some people will live their chart in the shadow and some will live it on a high level. If moon in Aries is stressed or not being lived on a high level, it can be very selfish. It can be self-centered. It can be demanding. And here's her father saying she has a selfish personality. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And, very common in con artists, there is a lack of empathy or remorse. And Anna displayed in many situations, if you see her in some interviews, that there was very little remorse about what she did and very little empathy.
Or even admitting that she had done anything.
And we're going to...
That was improper.
We'll show you some quotes about that when we get later in the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Moon in Aries lived on the shadow side can be very narcissistic, very narcissistic. And she displayed that if you listen to the whole story, and especially if you watched the Inventing Anna series, which I think got quite a bit of the story correct. There were some parts that, were sensationalized or changed a bit, but I think
they totally made it up. They even said so.
Yeah. But there were some parts that were correct.
Yes.
And she was also described as an abrupt personality, sometimes rude and not warm, very impatient, very, very impatient. You can see that on some of the interviews. And we will tell you where you can find those interviews so you can watch it with your own eyes. So I think to me, that makes a case for moon in Aries.
And this last thing, the abruptness, the quick, moon in Aries is fast. It's usually in a hurry to jump off a cliff or whatever it's doing. Whereas moon in Taurus is not a need that likes change. It needs to be more deliberate and present a more consolidated form. But this moon in Aries would be faster.
Mm-hmm. And assertive.
Yeah.
Assertive, even possibly aggressive. So I think there's a good case to say she was probably born before noon, probably has a moon in Aries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm satisfied with that.
Yes. And because it supports this next judgment that we are making based on what we have observed.
Now, Elizabeth and I both mentored under Noel Till, the big famous astrologer. We were good friends with him. We took his course. We were both in practice before we studied with him, but Noel really offered so much. And in his teaching, he focused a lot on hemisphere emphasis. And so what we're going to talk about now is what we think the hemisphere emphasis may have been for Anna Delvey, which would have been an Eastern hemisphere emphasis. I'll show you an image in a moment. But Eastern hemisphere emphasis means the majority of the planets that are not retrograde are going to be over on the left side of the chart, over by the ascendant. And the Eastern hemisphere emphasis has this incredible defensiveness, defensive posture.
Yeah, and what we mean by defensive, not just that it's a knight, and like I use this image, a knight in armor defending the gates of the castle, but also a need to be right, to defend their position.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody with an Eastern hemisphere emphasis might have on their tombstone, quote, "But I had the right of way," unquote. Right. They would be dead, but they would die being right. Exactly.
And they tend to get the last word in. Mm-hmm. And Eastern hemisphere emphasis is kind of walking around in a fighting stance, getting ready to punch you out, protecting their identity, ego justification. And so you see on the graphic here, the planets for an Eastern hemisphere emphasis, the majority of the non-retrograde planets would end up being in this zone, maybe even a little in the third house too. But, this is the Eastern hemisphere emphasis view. I just cannot see her definitely not as a Western hemisphere emphasis, which would be over here by the descendant, because that's somebody who tends to give themselves away and leave themselves behind, volunteer for everything, check the energy of the room and adjust for, it's the opposite for her. She dominated the room.
And take blame. I noticed, we've talked about this, our clients with Western hemisphere emphasis will often take on responsibilities and blame for things that are not theirs to take on. And we don't see a lot of that in what we observe with Anna. We don't see her saying, really, it was all my fault. We don't see this.
It was a lot of ego justification over and over and over again. So again, that would put, if we looked at birth times that would support moon in Aries, it would put the Eastern hemisphere emphasis. It would create that pattern. Okay. So now I highly recommend the viewers, if you haven't seen the interview that 60 Minutes Australia did with Anna, and you want to get a deeper flavor for her energy, check it out. All you have to do is Google it. Just Google Anna Delvey, 60 Minutes Australia. It'll come up. You can watch the entire thing. I think it's 25 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
So I took some quotes from it. And she said, "I don't care what you think of me. I don't need your approval. I don't need to impress you." She actually intimidated the interviewer. Did you see the whole thing, Elizabeth?
I sure did. I saw it twice.
Mm-hmm. And the interviewer was, "What do I do?" Well, he was shaken because she just went after him again, which suggests to me moon and Aries also.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I have no patience for people's stupidity. Oh,
Right.
interesting, isn't it?
No, but yeah, lack of patience would be one of those stereotypical buzzwords for
Mhm.
anything in Aries.
Mhm.
You know, a planet in Taurus has the patience of Job,
Yes.
enduring. So,
but she just came right out and said it.
yes, she did. She was quite combative and defensive, and had, when you watch the interview, the sense of justifying that what she had done was right.
Mm-hmm. Later, when we talk about her Mercury, this will factor in because she did not have very good control over her Mercury based on how it was placed, but we will get there.
Right.
So here's a photo of her from that interview. And in it, she said, I just don't feel guilty. Just came right out and said it. The interviewer asked her, I just don't feel guilty. Shook her head, just kept her ground. And he just sat there and blinked for a second or two. What? Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. It was, she was right.
Mm-hmm. So there's also a couple of quotes. This is from the New York Times. The reporter was Emily Palmer, May 10th, 2019, where Anna said, I'd be lying to you and everyone else and to myself if I said I was sorry for anything. So at least she's consistent, right?
And she is. Yep.